IB Bio, Human Physiology Part 10, is the second of two parts covering gas exchange. In Human Physiology Part 10, Gas Exchange B, this movie, the focus will be on the mechanism of ventilation. The mechanism of ventilation involves pressure differences between the thoracic cavity, the chest cavity, and the atmosphere. The second part of this movie will examine health issues related to the lungs. The essential idea is the lungs are actively ventilated to ensure that gas exchange can occur passively. Here is the first of two slides that provide an outline of all available movies for Topic 6, Human Physiology for SL and HL students. Use the outline to find the movie you need for review. This movie is focused here. Here is the second slide of the outline for all available movies for Topic 6, Human Physiology. Use the outlines to find the movie you need for review. Atmospheric pressure is measured using a barometer. A very simple barometer is shown here, where a tube filled with mercury is placed upside down in a dish of mercury. It's that simple. Atmospheric pressure pushing down on the mercury in the dish maintains the column of mercury here within the tube at 760 millimeters above the surface of the mercury in the dish. This pressure would be the pressure of the air, measured at 760 millimeters of mercury. 760 millimeters of mercury is the atmospheric pressure at sea level, and that's equivalent to 1 atmosphere or 101 kilopascals. These are all different pressure units. Now, partial pressure is defined as the pressure exerted by one gas in a mixture of gases. So, if the atmosphere surrounding us has 21% oxygen, which it does, then the partial pressure of oxygen in air would be 160 millimeters of mercury. Now, I'm providing this background so that you can understand pressure values that I present later in this movie. The ventilation system brings air to the lung surface, where oxygen would diffuse into the blood and carbon dioxide would diffuse out so that it could be exhaled. The diffusion of oxygen into the blood and carbon dioxide out of the blood is called gas exchange. The circulatory system moves the blood from the lungs to body cells everywhere. Cells require oxygen for cell respiration and release carbon dioxide as waste. The circulatory system moves the blood from body cells to the lungs to replenish the oxygen in blood and remove the carbon dioxide from the blood. Now, the diffusion of gases in and out of the bloodstream occurs according to concentration differences. The concentration differences are measured in partial pressures. Here is the first IB syllabus statement to kick off this movie. Explain the mechanism of ventilation of the lungs in terms of volume and pressure changes caused by the internal and external intercostal muscles, the diaphragm, and the abdominal muscles. The mechanism of ventilation involves a change in the volume of the thoracic cavity. Inspiration results from a lifting of the rib cage and a contraction of the diaphragm where it flattens, pulling down. This increases the volume of the thoracic cavity. Air is inhaled. This is inspiration. Expiration results from a compression of the rib cage and a relaxation of the diaphragm where it pushes up. This decreases the volume of the thoracic cavity. Air is exhaled. This is expiration. From past science courses, you should remember Boyle's law, which displays the relationship between pressure and volume in a closed container. The relationship is inverse. If the volume of the gas within the container is large, then the pressure exerted by the gas on the walls of the container is small. But if the volume of the container is small, then the pressure of the gas on the wall of the container is large. And that's the way it must be for this equation to work. Now, abdominal muscles, rib muscles, and the diaphragm cause the volume of the thoracic cavity to change. In turn, when the volume changes, the pressure within the cavity changes. This forces air in and out of the lungs, and this is ventilation. Here's the IB syllabus statement. Muscle contractions cause the pressure changes inside the thorax that force air in and out of the lungs to ventilate them. The intercostal muscles of the ribs play a role in changing the volume of the thoracic cavity. The external intercostals serve to pull the rib cage up, increasing the volume of the thoracic cavity, thus pressure within the thorax goes down. The internal intercostals serve to pull the rib cage down, decreasing the volume of the thoracic cavity, thus pressure within the thorax goes up. Changing the volume of the thoracic cavity changes the pressure within. We'll be looking at this in the slides to come. So here we go on the explanation of the mechanism of ventilation of the lungs in terms of volume and pressure changes caused by the internal and external intercostal muscles, the diaphragm, and the abdominal muscles. Let's start our examination of the mechanism with images that show the ventilation system at rest. The pressure in the thoracic cavity is equal to atmospheric pressure. Thus, there is no movement of air in or out of the lungs. Here is another image of the ventilation system at rest. Thoracic cavity pressure equals atmospheric pressure. Notice the diaphragm is relaxed and there is no movement of air in or out of the lungs. During inspiration, the external intercostal muscles contract, lifting the rib cage. The diaphragm contracts, shortening or flattening the muscle, and the diaphragm pulls down. Now, both of these events increase the volume of the thoracic cavity. Thus, the pressure within the cavity decreases relative to atmospheric pressure. Notice the lower pressure within the thoracic cavity relative to atmospheric pressure. Air flows in. Here is another image of inspiration. Notice the diaphragm in its contracted state. It's shortened, it's pulled down. The external intercostal muscles pull the rib cage up. The volume within the thoracic cavity increases. The pressure decreases. Air flows in. During expiration, the internal intercostal muscles contract, the abdominal muscles contract, and the diaphragm relaxes. The diaphragm relaxes. The volume of the thoracic cavity decreases, thus pressure within the thoracic cavity increases relative to atmospheric pressure. Air flows out. Here is another image of expiration. Notice the diaphragm in its relaxed state. It's longer, more concave. The internal intercostal muscles contract, forcing the ribs to pull down. The volume of the thoracic cavity decreases. The pressure within the cavity increases, and air flows out. Here are images of inspiration and expiration, which you can study on your own. Follow the shape of the diaphragm. Look at the arrows, which show the changes in the volume of the thoracic cavity. Remember the inverse relationship between volume and pressure. Then notice the airflow in or the airflow out. Ventilation can be measured by simply counting the number of breaths over time. The brain monitors the quantity of carbon dioxide in the blood. As carbon dioxide diffuses from active cells into the bloodstream, the pH of the blood changes. The brain effectively monitors blood pH and in turn regulates ventilation rate. Ventilation can be monitored in humans at rest and after mild and vigorous exercise. And there are times when the ventilation rate needs to increase in order to satisfy muscle cell need for oxygen. Again, as active cells release carbon dioxide into the bloodstream, the pH changes, and as such the brain monitors the quantity of CO2 in the blood and in turn regulates the ventilation rate. Here is a relevant IB syllabus statement. Distinguish between ventilation rate and tidal volume. Ventilation rate is the number of breaths you take in a given period of time, whereas tidal volume is the volume of air moved into or out of the lungs during rest, approximately 500 milliliters per inspiration. Here is a graph displaying lung volumes over time during different conditions. Let me show you. But before we begin, it's important to note that the lung has a 6-liter total capacity. But when you are at rest, sitting quietly, breathing quietly, gently in and out, the small volume of air going in and going out occurs in the range of 2,300 milliliters to 2,800 milliliters, approximately. This is called tidal volume. At rest, through this time period, the tidal volume could be measured as approximately 500 milliliters. Then we have forced inhalation here, and that forced inhalation is approximately 3,000 milliliters. And then we have forced exhalation, and that's approximately 1,500 milliliters. Notice that the lung is never completely empty of air. This is called the residual volume, and it's approximately 1,000 milliliters. Again, here is tidal volume, and this graph displays 3 breaths per 15 seconds. This would be the ventilation rate. And then here is forced inhalation. And then here is forced exhalation. If the respiration rate in cells increases because, let's say, of the need to escape a predator, carbon dioxide levels go up and ventilation rate increases, as you can see right here, bringing needed oxygen to the cells for ATP production. So here is the next IB syllabus statement. Describe the causes and consequences of lung cancer and emphysema. Smoking involves the intake of a high concentration of particulates and toxic molecules. Smoking causes cancer and emphysema. The effects of smoking are excessive production of mucus, paralyzed cilia because of the nicotine. Tars that contain carcinogens cause cancer in the epithelium of the bronchioles. And smoking makes worse, exacerbates pneumonia, emphysema, and asthma. Here is a photograph that shows the color of a smoker's lung, caused primarily by the tars to be found in cigarette smoke. Here is another image of a smoker's lung. The X-ray on the left displays a normal lung. The X-ray on the right displays the development of a tumor, which is lung cancer. Once again, here's a comparison of a healthy lung on the left and a smoker's lung on the right, which is ravaged with cancer. Let's shift our focus to emphysema. Emphysema is a chronic disease of the lung where the alveoli of the lungs are damaged and enlarged, causing breathlessness. You can see in this diagram, here and here, how the walls of the alveoli have been broken down. Due to damaged alveoli, there is less surface area over which oxygen and carbon dioxide can diffuse, and the walls of the alveoli become less elastic, less flexible, resulting in difficulties with exhaling. The causes of emphysema are smoking, air pollution, or exposure to coal or metals in mines. In this diagram of alveoli, normal alveoli on the left and alveoli displaying emphysema on the right, you can see the breakdown of the alveolar walls in the lungs of someone suffering from emphysema. The alveoli of the lungs are damaged. They are enlarged. Thus, there's less surface area for gas exchange. The alveolar walls are less elastic, causing breathlessness. Here are 2 micrographs displaying alveoli from someone suffering from emphysema. Notice the gaps in the image where the walls of alveoli have been damaged. Here are X-rays of lungs, a normal lung on the left, and 2 lungs displaying emphysema due to exposure to metals in the middle and on the right. Notice that the lungs of the 2 individuals exposed to metals have lungs that are more translucent. This is an indication of alveolar wall loss. It appears both individuals, middle and right, had enlarged hearts as well, as their emphysema would have required the heart to work harder to move blood to cells. And that brings us to the end of IB Bio Topic 6, Human Physiology Part 10, Gas Exchange B.